Written by Stieg Larsson and published in 2005, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was an almost instant and worldwide success. And the plot basically follows Mikael Blomqvist, a disgraced journalist who takes a sabbatical from his own magazine and is roped into investigating the disappearance of an industrialist's niece some 40 years earlier. He is aided and abetted by the computer hacker Lisbeth Salander, who, it's alluded to, may or may not be autistic. And there's a whole cast of other characters, or potential suspects if you prefer, surrounding the inquisitive industrialist. Larsson wrote in his native Swedish, and I read the English translation by Reg Kieland. However, either Larsson or Kieland is not a very good novelist, as huge tracts, I'd say 85-90% of this book, is very cold and emotionless. It reads rather like a history book or a biography. Long passages, often more than a few pages, recount the life history of the characters. Though it's worth mentioning, the Swedish and English versions have very different titles. The tattoo sporting girl of the English title, the quirky Salander, is clearly Larsson's labour of love, but I found her more interesting from a literary aspect than I did as an actual character, despite her many sufferings and idiosyncrasies. This is a fairly weighty tome, 500 plus pages in the edition that I have, and early on particularly it's slow going, and I started to wonder how much of Salander might be cut out of this book without making a significant impact on the plot. She is a ward of the state, declared mentally incompetent despite being something of a genius. She is sexually abused by her guardian and gains her own brutal revenge. And while this is integral to the character, most of the characters, Salander included, are introduced by way of a lengthy biography. Salander's biography then could have covered this in much less detail, streamlining a plot that none of her issues are actually that important to. But Larsson includes them largely because he has an agenda about rape. Salander is sexually assaulted. When it transpires that there may or may not be a killer historically or currently running around, they are also a serial rapist/murderer. Each part of the book, and there are 4, is introduced with statistics about sexual crime in Sweden. And it might just be me, I think maybe I've read too many books where a rape was involved this year, that it's starting to become frustrating that this is sort of being reduced to just a plot point, really, and not really a necessary one, in that I might be rambling and failing to make my point properly here, but I'll just say, would Hannibal Lecter, for example, be any more chilling if he was a rapist? I don't think so. I mean, it adds a level of brutality to the book here, but it could have been achieved in a different way, I think. The main bulk of the story is actually about Blomqvist's vendetta against the crooked businessman Wennerstrom. I apologise for pronunciations as well, by the way. And also his investigation into the murder disappearance of this girl. Salander initially is hired by Blomqvist just as a researcher. Blomqvist is actually an interesting character as well, but again more for what he says about Larsson than as an effective work of fiction. It's an easy parallel that both Blomqvist and his creator are both journalists, that the bile Blomqvist directs at his peers might be autobiographical, but what of his other traits? Blomqvist is happy to dismiss others as perverts, when he himself is in a 20-year relationship with a colleague in an open marriage. He also sleeps with Salander, and while he doesn't know that she's been declared mentally incompetent, that's the phrase they use in the book, by the way, and she certainly seems compos mentis to the reader and to him. Does it still lend a questionable nature to his relationship with her? He also sleeps with one of the potential suspects, both apparently happy that their relationship is something and nothing, really. Perhaps Blomqvist's womanizing is simply wish fulfillment on Larsson's part. But either way, it's hard to hold him up as a moral bastion of anything much when he is clearly a hypocrite. Once Blomqvist and Salander begin their investigation, which holds the interest just enough through the book's laborious first half, things do pick up. For the most part, Larsson generates a good amount of tension. But Blomqvist's vendetta against Wennerstrom makes this book continue 50 pages or so after its natural conclusion, and I wasn't completely convinced by Salander's switch from emotionless mechanical to teenager with a crush, just by virtue of Blomqvist's supposed charms. It's difficult to fully judge how effective the whodunit nature of the story will hold up, as I'd seen both the English and Swedish movies based on this book, so I had a pretty good idea of what was going to happen. That does, however, suggest that the effectiveness with which Larsson raises the temperature is doubly impressive, and this is a decent thriller, but certain aspects don't hold up. The car crash that kills a major character is as unemotional as one of Larsson's character biographies. It's a key moment in the story that rather underwhelms. Additionally, someone, we assume a murderer at large, dismembers a cat and leaves it on Blomqvist's doorstep. He's also shot at during his investigation, but he doesn't relocate from where he's staying, he doesn't involve the police, and he doesn't even improve his security until Solander takes the initiative. The crime and the mystery would have been solved some 200 pages earlier if they'd simply found who fired the gun. Additionally, it seems unlikely that the missing girl's code wouldn't have been broken during the initial investigation. Larsson is also bafflingly bogged down by utterly irrelevant minutiae at times. He describes every single item inside a cabin, every single item over 2 or 3 pages, none of which affect the plot in any meaningful way. And while his usual flood of information portrays his narrator or his characters as an expert in whatever particular field they're discussing at the time, there is one unintentionally amusing exception. Larsson clearly knows nothing about computers, which makes his portrayal of Solander and her hacking rather quaint generally, but the unintentional comedy comes from her lusty description of the mega powerful computer she just has to buy. Larsson describes the spec in full details, and of course 10 years on, it's all rather embarrassing, and I'd imagine you're watching this review on a tablet or phone that would wipe the floor with it. Anyone that knows about computers knows that specifications move so rapidly that your state-of-the-art will transition to obsolete between you writing your book and it appearing in print. He would have been better served just by injecting some rare emotion and brevity into the novel and leaving the cold specification in the catalogue he copied it out of. Despite my grumbling about the details, overall this is still a decent novel. It might even be better than that if you haven't seen either of the film adaptations. It's far too long, but it never slips below interesting, and it cranks up the tension and pace towards its effective conclusion. This is a solid but not exceptional example of the thriller genre, so it might be worth checking out if the premise appeals to you.